Start from the feet of a man and grow into a bush or a flower, I suppose. I don't know. These are just random interpretations of the things I doodled.
This McLaren painting dates from the late 1920s, when he was in high school. It is full of optimism as he traces the history of the era of invention and industrialization, and the promise of a prosperous future. On the back of this 1939 pastel are written the words, "Drawn the night Hitler invaded Poland."
Apart from the editing techniques in these Russian films, were you inspired at all by the politics of the films?
Certainly I was, because remember, when I grew up, I was born in 1914. At the age of 16 or 17, it was the Great Depression. And I had my first experience of the slums, and I was utterly shocked. So naturally, that's when I started thinking politically, what can be done about it? Something was seriously wrong with the economic system. So, like many young people in the Great Depression, our minds went to Russia as a possible experiment along new economic lines. My father, who was a staunch conservative, pillar of the church and all that, was greatly concerned when he found that I had such left-wing thoughts and feelings. When I suggested I wanted to go to Russia, he said, "Fine, I'll give you enough money for a good tour in Russia, and you'll see how they live, and you'll be cured from thinking that communism is a good thing." Actually, I went to Russia, and it was for a film and theater festival. So I had a marvelous time.
You weren't cured?
No, I was far from cured, but I began to get cured when the purges happened in Russia.
After his return from Russia, and while still at art school, McLaren and Helen Bigard, a sculptor, made Helen Limited. The left wing in Britain was now joining with liberal and conservative groups in a common front against fascism. Bigard and McLaren stood apart. They accused capitalism, whether in Germany or in Japan or in the democracies, as flourishing from the sale of arms to all sides in a potential conflict. Unpolished though the filmmaking was, the courageous and unequivocal positions taken by McLaren and Bigard have given it a unique place amongst British political films of the 1930s.
In 1936, when I was working at the GPO film unit, Grierson called me to his office one day and said, "Would you like to go to Spain as a cameraman with Ivor Montague? We want to go there for 3 weeks, you to record the Civil War, go to Alicante and then to Madrid." And we filmed and brought the footage back very quickly and edited it very quickly into a film. Ivor Montague did, and we showed it around trade union meetings, special groups, liberal groups, in order to collect funds for the Red Cross and the International Brigade. Life was hard. There was very little bread, no meat, no heat. It was in November, I think, very cold. I don't know in the First World War whether there was any bombing of civilian citizens, but this was the first time. And we would have a taxi, Montague and myself, and I would have my camera ready. And as we were traveling, we would notice if there's a smoke coming up, and we'd go to where the smoke was and immediately photograph the results of the bombing, the people being pulled out of the houses and or dead bodies and people wounded, and we'd try to, we were like newsreel photographers.
A large sum of money was raised at screenings of Defense of Madrid. The public discovered commercial newsreel companies were not telling the full story of the war in Spain. The horror of the Civil War profoundly affected McLaren. Back in London, he was plagued by nightmares. When, in 1939, Germany and Russia signed a non-aggression pact, McLaren, with many others, felt betrayed. He embraced pacifism, and following the outbreak of World War II, he emigrated to the USA and later during the war years in the USA and Canada, McLaren's completed films indicated none of these emotions.
I realized perhaps the necessity of a war because of what Hitler was doing to the racial question. So I cooperated with the war effort, but no more than I had to. You know, I wasn't an enthusiastic cooperator, but the kind of cooperation I was asked to do was very simple. Make light films with wartime messages, like buying savings bonds, keeping your mouth shut.
In 1949, however, McLaren found himself in China at the climax of their civil war. It would be a watershed in his life. McLaren's reputation as a filmmaker who made much from little had brought him to the attention of both the Chinese government and UNESCO. And he went to China to run the audiovisual section of the Healthy Village project. In 1953, he went to India in a similar capacity with the English artist Edward Ardizoni. McLaren trained artists and teachers to produce materials for use in rural areas in conjunction with the work of medical and agricultural experts. McLaren realized immediately that the use of indigenous means of communication was the key to a successful rural education. So he and the Chinese artists invented ingenious variations on the wall poster and the scroll.
I was able to teach them a few things, but they taught me a good deal more, especially about communicating with people of other races and languages.
Although the Healthy Village project took place at the climax of the Chinese Civil War between the nationalists and the communists, the program had an impressive impact. Its philosophy became the basis for future UNESCO projects.
About 3 months after I went out there, communists took over our particular town, and for the rest of the year I was living under the new regime, and I was able to see what it was doing and talked with many people and heard the story of their lives, particularly people between the ages of 20 and 30. I tended to identify myself with what was going on there because I found what was happening was very good. So then when I left China, the Korean War broke out the same day almost as I left China, and I came back to North America, and I felt a great tension about war in general. The tension that was produced from my years' experience in China, plus my return to here, and to an environment where the newspapers were saying something totally different from what I'd been used to, that tension produced the film Neighbors.
I can't judge my films, but if all my films were to be destroyed, except one, I would prefer to have Neighbors, because it has a strong social message about the covetous of man, about the irrationality of using violence to solve solutions. It's a human statement which reveals human nature, which none of my other films do. But the Oscar didn't mean anything to me, winning an Oscar. I didn't know what it was. It's not important. But the film, I feel, is important.
In 1971, McLaren was asked why he hadn't made any more films like Neighbors.
That's because the life I lead here doesn't bring it out for me. You see, I shuttle back and forth between home and the National Film Board, and lead a relatively quiet existence with a few intimate friends, and I'm not out in the world meeting people or in a different culture. And the only films which concern human beings, apart from some very early films, is Neighbors, Cherry Tale, and Pas de Deux.
Cherry Tale is the story of a man who goes to sit in a chair, and the chair animates itself and responds by not wanting him to sit on it.